Mastery of Music Theory, Book 1, Fundamental Materials, by Brian Kehlenbach. Chapter 4, Major and Minor Seconds. A musical interval is the distance between two notes. We have already touched upon the study of intervals when discussing octaves in Chapter 1, as well as when discussing the half steps in Chapter 3. An additional interval, the whole step, must be explained at this point before moving to a more general discussion on intervals. As you recall, the half step is the distance between any two adjacent notes on a keyboard. The whole step is the distance of two half steps. Both whole steps and half steps are useful concepts, as they allow us to create the formulas necessary to build scales. When finding a whole step up from a given note, simply start on the given note and move up two half steps. Likewise, move down two half steps to find a descending whole step. The intervals you see here are melodic intervals. This is because they would be played one note after another in time. If the two notes of the interval are played simultaneously, they are called harmonic intervals. Here is an example of the same intervals written as harmonic intervals. Notice that these harmonic intervals are to be played simultaneously, but they are written on a bit of a diagonal angle with all the accidentals off to the left. They are not lined up vertically because the notes of this interval are so close together they would overlap and be hard to read. To be more precise in the writing and identification of intervals, it is necessary to introduce a new naming system that defines not only the distance between the notes, but also the choice of note names. For example, the sound of a whole step interval, written in the exercise we just saw, could have been written in at least two different ways using enharmonic notes. Even though both of these intervals are whole steps and have exactly the same sound, their appearance on the staff is quite different. In later chapters, we will see that the musical implication of each version is also quite different. Therefore, we need to employ an interval naming system that can distinguish between these examples. From E to F sharp is called a second. From the E to G flat is called a third. An interval of a second always implies the distance from one note of the musical alphabet to the next note of the musical alphabet, either up or down. An interval of the third implies counting up or down 3 letters of the alphabet, starting by calling your first note number 1. You can ignore the accidentals when deciding if an interval is a second or a third. For example, in this exercise, we count E, F, G as 1, 2, 3, and this determines that it is a third. It is quite easy to see the difference between seconds and thirds when written on a staff. The notes comprising the interval of the second will always be on a line and an adjacent space, or a space and an adjacent line. Intervals of the third will always be on a space and an adjacent space, or a line and an adjacent line. For greater precision, it will be necessary to further qualify the size of the interval of the second by labeling it as either a minor second or a major second. A minor second is the interval of the second that is a half step. A major second is an interval of the second that is a whole step. Notice that for each of these definitions, two things must be true. For example, the minor second must be a second, that is, from one note of the musical alphabet to the next note of the musical alphabet, either up or down. It must also be the distance of a half step. If either condition is not true, then it is not a minor second. Now it will be necessary to consider the accidentals carefully when applying these labels. In the examples you are seeing, only one of the intervals is a minor second. For each, we test both criteria before identifying it as a minor second. In example A, it is a half step, but it is not a second. In B, it is a second, but it is not a half step. In C, it is a half step and it is also a second. Therefore, it is a minor second. And in D, it is a half step but it is not a second. As you can see, only C is a minor second. For the major second, there are also two criteria. Again, the interval must be a second, but it must also be the distance of a whole step. Both conditions must be true to label an interval as a major second. In these examples, only one is a major second. We will test both criteria. In A, we see the distance of a whole step, but it is not a second. In B, it is a whole step and also is a second. C, it is a second but not a whole step. So therefore, only example B is a major second.